Is Microshift Sword and Sword Black the Shimano GRX for the people? Let's find out. There's a lot of buzz out there about the new Microshift Sword and its 9-speed variant called Black. Most of the reviews have been focused on the 1x drivetrain, which to me is a shame because they're like missing out on half the story. So I'm here to fill in that other half. I've been riding with Microshift Sword for the last few weeks, trying it out with various derailleurs and pushing its compatibility limits. I also have the new 9-speed Black group set, but I haven't mounted yet because I'm still assembling the bike that it's all going to go on. So this video is going to be largely a review of the 2x Microshift Sword, as well as making some comparisons to Sword Black since they're essentially identical except for the 10 and 9 speed difference. So first off, Microshift did send these group sets to the channel to review, but I'm not getting paid and I'm free to say what I want. We have no financial sponsors on this channel and are supported by you guys via Patreon and sticker sales. It's a harder way to make the channel sustainable because essentially, we have to do the equivalent of a bake sale every month to keep things going. But the upside is that we're not beholden, nor are we at the mercy of sponsorship from Bike Brand. This gives us the editorial freedom to make the videos we want to make and say the things we want to say. So if you appreciate that, check out the links below. And speaking of things that we want to say, and one of them is while the 1-speed variants of Sword and Sword Black are okay, I think the more compelling offerings from the Sword lines are the 2x variants. While not in vogue, you do get more range for not that much more money, and it becomes infinitely more useful in my opinion if you're doing any kind of loaded riding. So ergonomics on Sword are excellent. I covered a lot of this on my review of the 1x versions. They're some of the most comfortable levers I've tried, and they don't add excessive reach in my experience like some other levers like say SRAM. They are a little bit girthy. In one way that's a plus, you get a nice handhold, but if you really have small hands, they might feel a little bit big. But for me, they're super comfortable. One thing I noticed immediately is how well these worked with pawl clampers. I feel like I'm getting true one-finger braking from the tops with the clampers. This isn't always the case with other road levers. I'm not sure if it's because they changed the fulcrum point of the levers or something, but they work awesome with clampers. To shift, there are 2 paddles, one larger one to shift into easier gears and a smaller one to click into harder gears. The paddles are okay. They do take some adjustment. Like I mentioned in my 1X video months ago, and something that others have brought up, shifting to a lower gear takes a lot more throw than you would expect. You kind of have to keep going that extra centimeter or so. If you don't, this potentially leads to misshifts, but once you learn how it works, I haven't had a problem. The paddle to shift into harder gears, it's a little bit on the small side, and it isn't as easy to reach in the drops. I feel like these shifters definitely had the rider who rides on the hoods most of the time in mind when they designed these shifters. Between Sword and Sword Black, the clickiness and throw of the levers are identical. There's like pretty much no difference. Aside from the coloration and maybe slight textural things with the brake levers themselves, the small paddle that shifts into a harder gear is slightly larger on the Sword edition, and that's about it. Otherwise, functionality and feel is the same. Another thing I really like about these Microshift levers is cable routing is super easy and intuitive. It's well marked. They have lots of great video documentation on their own YouTube channel. And because of this, I think it makes the perfect road shifters for DIYers and home mechanics. These might be some of the best user-friendly levers currently out there on the market. I feel like with Shimano, it's not really obvious where the cable goes in. You really have to pull the hoods back and guess which hole to route things through. But with these levers, clearly marked, super easy to get up and running. Of the group set, I used the shifters, the front derailleur, the rear derailleur, and the cassette. I opted for the moment to try it with my own homebrew crankset, which is by Dixna LeCrank. I've done videos on this. It's a 4026, and it worked great. It worked a lot better than I expected. Despite the front derailleur being shaped for their larger 46-tooth crankset, which by the way, the crankset does come in a 165 length, which is pretty awesome if you want to try shorter cranks. The front derailleur shifted between my 40-26 wide range double here perfectly. So basically the takeaway here is that yes, you can use different cranksets with Sword if the chainring combination for whatever reason doesn't fit what you want. I think of all the parts in the drivetrain, the cranks might be the weakest link. They're a little bit on the heavy side. They don't have the most flexible BCD in my opinion, but you're really limited in terms of flexibility in how low you can go in terms of gearing. Let's talk about the front derailleur for a second, because I think it's the unsung hero of this drivetrain. I didn't see any other reviewers mention it. Routing is simple and well marked. It also has a built-in cable stop and adjustment. So if you have a bike without a front derailleur cable stop, which most bikes these days don't, you don't have to go to that extra step to find a clamp-on cable stop. You can just run the housing straight into the front derailleur. And even if you don't have barrel adjusters, there is a bolt there that can help you adjust the tension. The routing is intuitive, and it keeps the cable tucked neatly away from hitting the front chainring without resorting to any cable origami or a plastic cap that you have to thread it through into itself. I'm looking at you, Shimano. So I highly recommend it, and it's actually one of my favorite things about the drivetrain. Like if you're looking for a front derailleur for a 2x setup and you're not running Sword, I'd definitely take a look at the Sword front derailleurs. So in terms of differences between Sword and the 9-speed Black Edition, the biggest things are, the shifters. Clearly one of them only shifts to 9 speeds. The Sword 10-speed rear derailleur has a clutch. It has that orbital cable guide, and it has a stated low gear capacity of 38. The Black version has no clutch. It doesn't have the orbital cable guide. It just kind of routes straight in, but it has a similar low gear capacity. At the end of the day, I think they're pretty close. And to be honest, the clutch on both feel relatively similar. Like I don't think the clutch version is exponentially clutchier than the standard 9-speed. So don't lose sleep. If you're super price sensitive, just get the Black version without the clutch and save a couple dollars. Let's get back to capacity. This is a big sticking point to mine. The rear mech has a large cog capacity of 38. When Shimano states something like that, when they say, it'll take a 34, usually that means you can cram in at least like a 40 or 42 in there. That is not the case with Microshift. When they say 38, they're being pretty accurate. I tried the Sword rear derailleur with 11 to 42, and it was too much for the rear mech to take up the slack. You could size it so you could run big, so you wouldn't rip off the front derailleur if you happen to land in that combination. But the small was, there was just too much slack. So I think at most you could probably make it work with an 11 to 40, but the 42 would be too much of a stretch, definitely not the 46. And for me, it's a bit of a shame, really, because it doesn't seem like there's any real downside to having a slightly longer cage to allow even larger cassette in the rear. Even if they only sell and officially support the 38, it would be nice to have that kind of wiggle room. So for those of you wanting to run a true wide range 2x, this isn't your drivetrain, but there is a bit of an open secret, or I guess it's a secret since a lot of people don't know about it. But Microshift Advent X, Sword, and Sword Black use the same cable pull as Shimano Dynasis rear derailleurs. So that opens up a whole world of Shimano's mountain bike rear derailleurs. So while the Microshift Sword derailleur isn't technically capable of doing an 11 to 42 in a 2x, I did ride with the Dior M5120 SGS rear derailleur for a few weeks, and it worked great. So that means for both Sword 10-speed and Sword Black 9-speed, if you want more capacity and wider range than is permissible by the Microshift rear derailleurs, just get a Shimano Dynasis one. Who is this for? In a time when the mainstream bike industry is pushing towards electronic shifting and hydraulic brakes, Microshift offers one of the few all mechanical, dare I say, peak mechanical drivetrains out there. Some people will lament that it's not hydraulic, but look, that exists. If you want cable shifting and hydraulic brakes, there's lots of options out there. Quit your complaining. This is a hole in the market. Mechanical, cable. There shouldn't be any fluids on your bike except for sweat. So in my opinion, if you want an all cable option with great ergonomics, decent range with the ability for more if you don't mind some experimentation, the Microshift Sword and Sword Black are great platforms. You could get a complete drivetrain with a wider range, with a lot of money to spare for the cost of one SRAM T-type rear derailleur. Just saying. Now, is it peak mechanical? Not quite. There are some things. The pedal size and placement could use some rethinking. The rear mech could have some capacity, and there could be a greater diversity of 2x options in the front, similar to what Q's is offering with a 4026. An all silver version would be like chef's kiss. Speaking of peak mechanical and ultra wide range, I am doing some things to make this work with Shimano Q's. In theory, it should. But when we get back from Eurobike, I'm going to do some experimentation and see if we can make it happen. I'm also planning to put the 9-speed black on a bike once I get that bike back from the bike shop. If you want to support the channel, especially our search for the best peak mechanical drivetrain today on the market, join us on Patreon, pick up a sticker, and as always, keep the supple side down.